Let's begin.
Hey there, Scary Story fanatics. Welcome back to Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. It's almost time for Thanksgiving, and that means time with those that we love. However, what is it that loves you back? Consider this while you sit down to tonight's frightening tale with monstrous love and affection.
It was November of 2022. The days had begun growing short, and the air had become bitter with the wind. Winter was coming, and typically, James embraced the coming blustery weather. But recently he found himself sapped and fatigued, unable to enjoy all the little things he used to, at least not with any amount of energy and reverence. He didn't know what was causing it. Lots of people get sick this time of year with the turn of the season, but he'd exhibited absolutely no signs of any infections or viruses. No runny nose or sore throat, no fever, nothing. If he hadn't been so tired, he wouldn't know anything was wrong at all. Well, except for that of the very strange dreams that he'd been having. In his dreams, the ones that he could remember as of late, there was always something unnameable, biting at him, draining him, using him like a parasite. The nightmares themselves were ambiguous and vague, fever dream-like, but the one single constant was that James was always being consumed. He figured they were just dreams, but today, his fourth day of having no energy to speak of, he began to think differently, considering that maybe, somehow, whatever plagued his dreams was also sapping his energy. More a medical condition rather than anything more sinister, but he felt that a subconscious connection could both explain his constant nightmares and world-altering fatigue. James consumed vast amounts of caffeine, ate healthy all day, and still felt no better by the evening. And when his dreams were plagued by mastication of his own form once more, he decided to see a doctor. James walked out of the hospital the following day, feeling both relieved and confused. The examinations the physician had performed had led to the result that James was actually anemic. James ate plenty of red meat and other iron-rich foods, so although he and his doctor could not fully explain why he was anemic, they had at least a plan for moving forward. Additionally, however, the doctor also discovered that James's blood pressure was curiously low, and that he had developed some kind of odd rash on his back. The doctor said it could have been caused by a plethora of things: fleas, bedbugs, or simply even an abrasive laundry detergent that he could have used on his sheets. With the additional recommendation of some Benadryl, James left the clinic off kilter, but a hopeful mind that he was now on the path to recovery. However, he would find it was not so simple. Over the next few days, James stuck to his high-iron diet and regimen of allergy medications for the rash that he had developed. He was feeling a bit better, but the rash had not gone away. In fact, it had gotten even worse. As such, James returned to his doctor for a follow-up and received an additional prescription for prednisone, a common steroid used by physicians to clear up skin ailments and generally strengthen the body's immune system. The doctor said James would have to stay on these for a few days before he likely noticed any effect. James filled the script and did as he was told, hoping this would be the end of what was left of his extreme fatigue, and this odd rash on his back. His work was really suffering, and he really needed to be able to concentrate while on the clock. James didn't bother looking up at his clock to see what time it was that he was waking. The room was nearly resolute with darkness and shadow, but the hour didn't matter to him. However, the blinding pain in his back did. James reached behind him to touch the area that pained him, and when he did, he found his rash had welted and was slick with what he had to assume could only be blood. And it was both painful and itchy to the touch. But that's not what horrified him or caused him to spin around where he now sat. It was the other thing that he felt when he reached behind him. When he placed the tips of his fingers on his back, near his lower spine, he felt something wet and worm-like jump at his touch and quickly recoil towards the edge of his bed, off his back. Whatever it was that moved, it was not of his own body. James flicked on his light and looked down at his bed, seeing a very small blood trail leading off the side and appearing to end right there on the floor. James recoiled himself with a horrifying prospect that maybe this thing had been feeding off of him. Maybe whatever had just happened to him, of which he still had no idea. Maybe this is why he was so tired and developed the odd rash on his back. Shakily, James looked down over the bed and saw that the blood did not end at the floor at all. Instead, to his shock, it continued under his bed. James wanted to run, or throw up, or maybe both, but he knew he had to look under his bed. Slowly, trying not to make a noise, James hung his head down under his bed, trying to be ready for, to him, something that was completely unknowable. But he pushed on anyway. Now, at first, he didn't see anything horrible or odd under his bed, except for what was nearly an indistinguishable tiny trail of blood that disappeared behind the many boxes, clothes, and other forgotten junk that he had placed or kicked under there. Methodically and uneasily, reaching his hand outward, James began moving some of the piles and boxes of things under his bed out of his way. Once he thought he saw something move, but he couldn't be sure. James moved a few more things out of his way, just to check, and when he moved the last box out of his way, his face stretched out in a scream, but he couldn't. It was like his body was too paralyzed with fear to flee, retreat back onto his bed, or even scream with the sheer horrific thing that he was now witnessing. Before his eyes, James saw a thing that he couldn't quite fully describe. It was a mass of fleshy tentacles, both thick and thin, but most much longer than the bulging mass that appeared to be in the center of it. Its black eyes were far larger than what could be called a small face. It had two small dimples in its fleshy facade under those large bulbous eyes that had to be its nose, for below that was a small mouth lined with tiny teeth that screeched out almost like a baby when opened wide. James didn't know what to do, but he did also realize that however dreadful this thing was, it appeared to be just as afraid of him as he was of it, shrinking into the corner of his wall, under his bed, crying out relentlessly. James reached out for anything that he could use, and luckily for him, when he gripped it, he realized that he had a blanket nearby and a broom in his bedroom closet. In what could have been described as a single motion, James leapt off of his bed, blanket in hand, lifted his bed with the other, and threw the blanket into the corner. As the bed slammed cockeyed onto the floor, exposing both the blanket and the monster beneath, the thing began attempting to wriggle out and flee. But before it could, James had already retrieved the broom from the very small closet near to his bed, and with much effort and panic, the thing was beaten and then dragged up the wall with the broom and a blanket and forced out the bedroom window after he had managed to open it. James stood there, his body buzzing with adrenaline that slowly began to dissipate. What was that thing? How had it gotten under there? James wouldn't ever really get answers to these questions, but he was okay with that. It was gone. Or so he thought. Over the next few days, James would increasingly become aware of a faint crying out in the night, just beyond his window panes in the dark, crying out in what sounded like a sadness and pain. James would hear it every night, and eventually he began to think differently. Maybe he had heard it somehow. The thing had never really caused him much pain until he started taking the doctor's medications. Just some tiredness and a small rash that barely itched. Maybe he made it sick. It was afraid of him, and certainly, although his body structure was strange, it was small, and the eyes were so large for its head, and the way it sounded when it seemed to cry made James think it was a baby, of whatever species it was. It was kind of cute. Maybe he had heard it when he had so eagerly pushed it up and out the wall and window. James frowned. He lived alone. He didn't really have any friends. James climbed out of bed and, after placing on his shoes and coat, left through his front door and out into the night. Following the sound of this creature, it didn't take long for James to locate it, shivering behind a tree about 30 feet away. The thing saw James and froze, but it also stopped crying. James looked at it and saw that the thing seemed much healthier now. Maybe he needed to eat better. It was no longer bleeding from its tentacles, and its fleshy color was no longer as putrid or slimy. The thing looked at James and it gurgled. He laughed. He didn't know what this thing actually did eat. Rodents, birds, children, it didn't really matter to him. Hell, he would even let it feed on him every now and then if it needed to. James reached down and picked up his parasitic friend, and it once again gurgled at him. He smiled all the way home, carrying it with monstrous love and affection, happy to have his new friend back where it belonged.
Well, keep the ones that you love close, and the ones that are eating you even closer, especially around Thanksgiving, of course. And of course, tune in again next weekend for more gore galore. And until then, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can catch you all again next Saturday.
Social media can be very unpredictable, especially regarding horror content. If this content gets removed, all new content will be simultaneously presented on various websites provided in the description to this video. Make sure to follow me in other digital spaces so that you never miss out on the terror. Also, if you like this video, make sure to leave a comment and hit the like button. It helps the channel a lot. If you're new to the channel and you enjoy what's here, consider hitting that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you never miss an upload. Writing is a dream of mine, and it's all of you that make that dream come true.